Welcome back in another episode of Coffee with Suraj, and you can see that I'm wearing third wave shirt because have to be coffee themed when I'm recording Coffee with Suraj. So anyway, in this video we'll talk about HashiCorp configuration language, or HCL for short. Like show you around what it is and what it can do. Because all the code that you write in your Terraform file is HCL basically. You can think of it as a programming language, but not really. Right? It's a DSL, a domain specific language uh, that is written by HashiCorp. It's a subset of Ruby, I think, because it has Ruby like syntax, but it's not really Ruby. You don't have full Ruby there. You have stuff like variables. You can read files. You have functions. We'll go through the documentation and see what all it can do. So yeah, let's get into it. So, uh, 1 second, go in the corner. Okay, so I'll look at an example program that they've shown. This is a pretty good example. So think of this as a Terraform program or .tf. It's declaring a provider, saying it needs a provider, AWS provider. It's at HashiCorp/AWS in the Terraform registry, similar to how you have Docker registry, NPM registry. Uh, this is the place where you want this provider to come from. This is the version that you want, right? And this version string says that like 104, and this means that like you want major version to be true, but patch can be like anything. uh, this is from bundler syntax world, but basically you're telling that like this is the version that you want. And this is a variable. It's very similar to what you have in other word languages. Then there is another variable, like this variable is empty, right? uh, there is another variable called cider block. This is the default value of the variable. This is the description, what this variable contains. uh, you see one more variable, like it defines its type, and you're saying that this should be a list of string. Then you are configuring your provider. So it's saying provider AWS, set the region to variable AWS dot region, which is not defined here. So it will set it to an empty map. Uh, Now you see a resource defined, right? We talked about resource definition in previous videos, and where they come from. So here there is a resource called AWS VPC that's coming from AWS provider, because that's the only provider we are using. And now it's like setting this cider block to base cider block, like there is a variable that we defined here, right? So this will basically take this value. You can literally just like take this and put here. uh, that's what it does. But if you're using the base cider block again and again across resources, you don't want to hard code this, right? So you can just create a variable and then reference that variable like var dot your variable name. And then you see another resource. It's calling length function on availability zones and then setting the count, basically. So this is an example of function call. So it has basic function calls, uh, uppercase, lowercase, string replace and stuff like that. uh, you can see here there is a map that we created, availability zone, right? And then it's doing index lookup in that, similar to how you do map index lookup. Here it's setting VPC ID as AWS VPC.main.id. So this one, you see that this is not a variable. This is a resource, right? And if you go into AWS VPC resource, you'll see there is something called output, right? So what here we are doing is that when you create that resource, it will expose certain information. 1 second, I'll show you what I mean by output. uh, should have seen it. Come on. AWS VPC, 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 VPC. Let me search. So in this you see that yeah. So this is your resource, this is argument, this is attributes reference, right? Okay. Okay, we found AWS VPC finally. So you see that this is how you define an AWS VPC, right? And then it you'll see some output reference variable, argument reference, then attribute reference, right? So these are the things that you can access from the resource, right? Once the resource is created, you can query all these things. Like these are the things that it will output. So ID of the VPC, ARN of the IPC, VPC, not IPC. What the hell? Words are all over the place. Uh, but basically, you can have something like this, where you are saying referencing to another resource in a different resource. So you're referencing your VPC uh, by this is your resource type, this is your resource name, vpc.main. This is the ID attribute that you see here, right? ID of the VPC. Yeah. So also one more thing this does is now it like Terraform knows that it needs AWS VPC before it can create an AWS subnet, because you're referencing AWS VPC. So it'll build the dependency graph. So it'll create AWS VPC before it'll go and create AWS subnet, because it needs the ID of AWS VPC to create this subnet. So this dependency thing you don't have to define. Like Terraform is smart enough to figure it out. Let's say you created a VM, and you want to, like, another example would be you created a VM and you want to set a DNS record to be the IP of the VM. So you can have a resource AWS EC2 instance name, and that will export an IP address. Then you can have another resource, AWS route 53, name the DNS whatnot, and then you can set the DNS A record to be the IP of that. So when you'll do TF apply, it will create that VM, get the IP, and then create the DNS record, and set the IP of the VM to be that DNS record. So you see in this, we're using another variable availability zone, and then it's using another function called CIDR subnet. Uh, so that's this example pretty much shows the basic stuff that you get with Terraform configuration language, or HCL. You can look through the docs, where it has like details on what all it provides. Expressions, you can have strings, conditions, if else, true, splat, whatnot. Obviously, there are variables. You can have input variables that you take as an input, similar to how your function takes an argument, right? This is mostly used when you write a module. Then there are output variables, right? Output variables is something that you export out of a resource. Let's say you created a resource, created an EC2 instance. You want to expose the IP of the instance so the other resources can use it, right? You do that by output variables, right? Uh, and outputs are defined when you're writing modules, right? Then there is something called local variable, similar to how you have local variables in your programming language. Let's say you have a piece of information you want to use again and again, put it in local variable. Could be tags, like, and could be service name, environment, and whatnot. Mostly put them in your local variables. Then the functions, we saw one function being used called CIDR subnet, but it has a whole host of functions, right? You'll see math function, numeric functions, string functions, conditionals. You can do base 64 decoding, encoding, time formatting. You can read files, You can check if a file exists or not. IP networks, like this was the function that we were using it. No, not this one. I think it was cider subnet. Huh. So you can see this calculates the subnet address within given IP address range for effects, similar to any other functions. Like they're built in into Terraform. You can transform basically things to booleans, do encoding, concatenate strings, flatten index, do math. Find max, min, power, uh, and stuff like that. Uh, so yeah, that's your HCL.